Okay, so first let's graph this region. This is my x-axis. This is my y-axis. What is the graph of x equals 2 square root of y? We can rewrite that as 1/2 x is equal to square root of y, or 1/4 x squared is equal to y when you square both sides. So that's a parabola right there. Okay. The second equation is x equals negative 2y, and that becomes negative 1/2 x equals y. That's a line. And finally, you have y equals 1. That is simply a horizontal line. So let's graph that one right here. Y equals 1/4 x squared. If x is 0, y is 0. If x is 2, y is 1. So right there. That's a parabola right there. And this one here, if x is 0, y is 0. If x is negative 2, y is 1. So this one is a line. Okay. So the region that we need to revolve about the line y equals 1 is this region. And so if I'm going to use disk method, I will have to use two integrals, because you can see that the disk change the equations that determine the disk changes. Okay, from negative 2 to 0, the disk is determined by the line y equals 1 and this line here. So that's our representative rectangle, which when we revolve about the line y equals 1 becomes a disk. So that's going to be from negative 2 to 0. So we recall that the disk method is given by pi from a to b of r of x squared dx, right? So that's from the area of the circle, pi r squared, okay? Okay, so the radius here would be determined by the line y equals 1. So 1 minus, and our line here is negative 1/2 xy. So there you go, negative 1/2 x. We have to square that times pi dx. And the second integral is from 0 to 2. Don't forget our pi. The radius now is determined by the line y equals 1 and the parabola 1/4 x squared dx. So that's going to be basically the setup for disk method. So for shell, remember the formula for the shell method. It's 2 pi times the integral of p of y times h of y times dy from c to d. Okay. P of y is the radius of the shell. H of y is the height of the shell. And d of y is the thickness. In the disk method, this is simply the radius. Okay. And dx is the thickness of the disk. Okay. So we are integrating now along the y-axis. So the shell's gonna start from 0 to 1. It's gonna be 2 pi. The radius would be, if I will now draw my shell here, okay. Let me do another figure here for the shell method. Okay. So that's my line y equals 1. This is my y-axis. This is my x-axis. This is my parabola. And this is my line. So if I have a shell here, let's say this is my shell. The radius is determined by this. That's the radius of the shell. And that is represented by 1 minus y. Why is that? If the shell is at 1/4, y equals 1/4, then the radius of the shell must be 3/4 because this line is 1. So 1 minus 1/4 is 3/4. If my shell is at 1/2, so my shell now will be like this, then the radius should be 1/2. And how will I get 1/2? 1 minus y. So this is your representative radius for the shell. Now the height of the shell, the upper part of the shell is determined by this parabola, which is 2 square root of y, minus the lower part of the shell is determined by the line negative 2y dy. So we can simplify this and get 2 pi from 0 to 1 of 1 minus y. We can factor out the 2 so that we only have y to the 1/2, which is the square root of y, plus y dy. Now we multiply using FOIL, okay? And so we get 1 times y to the 1/2 is y to the 1/2. The outer terms, 1 times y is y. The inside terms, that's negative y to the 3/2. Why is that? Well, y times y to the 1/2, this y is understood to have a power of 1 or 2/2. And so when you add the exponents, you're going to get 3/2. And then finally, minus y squared dy. Integrating every term using power rule, that becomes 2/3 y to the 3/2 plus 1/2 y squared. That will become 2/5 y to the 5/2 minus 1/3 y cubed from 0 to 1. Let me explain why this becomes 2/3, right? So you recall, by power rule, you add 1 and you divide, right? So this is actually y to the 3/2 over 3/2. But when you divide by a fraction, you multiply by the reciprocal, so that you get 2/3. And that's how you get 2/5 as well. Now all we will do is plug in 1 for y. Now every time we raise 1 to some power, the value will always be 1. So this whole thing simply becomes 2/3 plus 1/2 minus 2/5 minus 1/3. And if I replace y by 0, the whole thing will be 0. We can combine 2/3 and 1/3. That will give me 1/3 plus 1/2 minus 2/5. So this simplifies to, we get the LCD, which is 3 times 2 times 5 is 30. 10. This will become 15. And that will become 12. So we have 4 pi times 10 plus 12, 10 plus 15 is 25, minus 12 is 13 over 30. We can cancel 4 and 30 by 2, so that becomes 2 and this becomes 15. And so we get 26 pi over 15. And that's your answer.